Hello and welcome back to the Happier Ever After series. Today we're talking about guilt, not the obvious kind, not guilt about something you did or didn't do, but the quieter, more confusing guilt that can surface after loss, especially when you begin to want more from life again. This is the guilt that shows up when you notice a moment of lightness, when you laugh and immediately feel a pang, when you enjoy something and then wonder if you're allowed to. If you've ever thought, why do I feel guilty for feeling okay? This episode is for you. Guilt after loss can be incredibly common, and yet it's rarely spoken about honestly. In the early days of grief, pain makes sense, sadness is expected. There's a kind of permission to suffer. As time passes and the intensity of grief shifts, something else often creeps in. Moments of relief, moments of connection, moments where life doesn't feel quite as heavy. And instead of feeling grateful for those moments, many people feel guilty. Guilty for laughing, guilty for smiling, guilty for enjoying something without them. There can be an unspoken belief underneath this guilt that feeling some okay somehow means you're betraying your loved one, as if grief is the price you must pay to prove how much they mattered. If that belief has shown up for you, I want to pause here because this is not a flaw in you, and it's not a sign that you're doing grief wrong. It's a reflection of how deeply you love. For many people, guilt becomes a way of staying connected, a way of saying, I haven't forgotten you. You still matter. The cost of that guilt can be high. It can keep you emotionally contracted. It can make joy feel dangerous. It can turn moments of peace into moments of self criticism. And over time, it can slightly limit your life. I want to gently explore where this guilt comes from because understanding it can change how you relate to it. One source of guilt after loss is loyalty. When someone dies, especially a partner, there can be a sense that moving forward means moving away from them, that building a life that contains pleasure, meaning, or growth somehow diminishes the relationship you had. This can be especially strong if your partner suffered or if the loss was sudden, unfair, or traumatic. There can be a feeling of, how can I be okay when they didn't get to be? That question doesn't come from selfishness, it comes from love. Another source of guilt comes from identity. When you lose a partner, your identity often shifts, whether you want it to or not. Roles change, responsibilities change, the shape of your life changes. As you begin to adapt to those changes, you may notice parts of yourself returning or new parts emerging, and that can feel unsettling. You might find yourself thinking, if I change too much, am I leaving them behind? If I grow, does that mean the life we had mattered less? Again, these questions make sense. They can also trap you in an impossible position where staying the same feels painful and changing feels disloyal. I want to be very clear here. Growth does not erase love. Adaptation does not equal betrayal. And finding moments of joy does not invalidate your grief. What often goes unspoken is that guilt after loss is not a moral signal. It's a nervous system and attachment response. When someone we love dies, our system doesn't just lose the person, it loses a reference point, a sense of safety, a shared future. As life begins to expand again, even slightly, the system can react with alarm. This feels unfamiliar. This feels unsafe. This doesn't match the world as it was. And one way the system tries to restore familiarity is through guilt. Guilt pulls you back into the known emotional landscape of grief. That doesn't mean it's helpful, but it does mean it's understandable. I also want to name something that many people feel but rarely say out loud. Sometimes guilt shows up because grief has become intertwined with meaning. When everything else has fallen away, grief can feel like the last remaining connection. Letting go of constant pain can feel like letting go of the relationship itself. If you've ever felt afraid of feeling better, not because you enjoy the pain, but because you don't want to lose what it represents, you're not alone. And there is no shame in that. But here's the reframe I want to gently offer. Your relationship with your loved one is not measured by how much you suffer. Love is not proven through pain, and your life is not required to stay small in order for your grief to be valid. Another layer of guilt can come from the outside world. Comments like, they would want you to be happy. You're so strong. You're doing so well. While often well meaning, these can land heavily because suddenly it can feel like you're being watched, assessed, judged. Too sad and people worry. Too happy and people question. And so guilt can become a way of managing other people's discomfort as much as your own. If that resonates, I want to say this. You are not responsible for making your grief palatable to others. Your internal experience does not need to make sense to anyone else. I also want to say something very important here. There is no right or wrong way to experience guilt after loss. Some people feel it intensely, others hardly at all. Some feel it early, others much later. None of these responses are better or worse. They are simply reflections of your relationship, your nervous system, and your context. The problem isn't the guilt itself. The problem is when guilt becomes the decision maker, when it dictates what you allow yourself to feel, when you allow yourself to want, how much space you allow yourself to take up in your own life. I want to offer a gentle shift. Instead of asking, is it okay for me to feel this? Try asking, or is this feeling protecting? Often underneath guilt, there is love, loyalty, fear, sadness. When you meet guilt with curiosity rather than judgment, it often softens. Not because it disappears, but because it no longer has to shout. If you notice guilt arising when something good happens, you don't need to shut it down or push it away. You might simply acknowledge it. Of course, this feels complicated. Of course, part of me feels torn. This makes sense. That kind of internal response creates safety. And safety is what allows growth to happen without force. I also want to be clear about something else. Wanting more from life after loss does not mean you are dissatisfied with the love you had. It means you are alive. And being alive comes with needs, desires, and capacity for meaning. There is room in your life for grief and for moments of lightness, for sadness and for hope, for remembering and for living. This is not an either or, it's a both and. And finding your way into that both and takes time. If, as you're listening, you notice discomfort, tension, or emotion rising, pause for a moment. You don't need to resolve anything today. Just notice your body. Notice your breath. Notice that you're here. You are allowed to take this at your pace. If guilt is part of your experience right now, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you loved deeply, and over time, with gentleness and support, that guilt can loosen. Not because love fades, but because it no longer needs pain to prove itself. If you'd like support as you navigate life after loss, you can explore the Life After Loss guide via the show notes, happiercoach.com/happier-ever-after/life-after-loss. You'll also find the Happier Ever After hub at happiercoach.com/happier-ever-after, where resources will continue to be added throughout the series. You don't need to rush joy. You don't need to justify feeling okay. You don't need permission to want more from life. You are allowed to carry love forward and still live. Thank you for being here with me today. I'll be with you again in the next episode. Until then.